can an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge be used to teach about the American Civil War? An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge is a piece of Civil War-era literature by Union soldier Ambrose Bierce. This short story shows different aspects of the lives and predominantly the psyche of Union and Confederate civilians and soldiers. So how can an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge be used to teach about the Civil War? How accurate is the portrayal of the Southern civilian and the Union Army? Is an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge a reliable representation of both the Union and the Confederacy that it could be used to better understand the war? If the short story is accurate, it would contain valuable material to a student provided through a different medium than textbook styles. Accounts. Ambrose Bierce's literary works dive into the widespread and complex ideals of war at the time that could be beneficial to the education of the Civil War. The first question I have here expands on the topic that I posed. Is an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge a reliable representation of both the Union and the Confederacy that could be used to better understand the war? The next three help to guide the research. How accurate is the portrayals of the Southern civilian and the Union Army? And lastly, how did Bierce's experience lay the foundation for his stories? And then my objectives are to examine the Southern civilian role in the American Civil War, examine the punishment given by the Union Army, and examine Ambrose Bierce's experience as a Union soldier. First, I want to give a quick background on the author, Ambrose Bierce. So he was born in the mid-19th century, and he enlists in the Union Army because he's old enough, and after a traumatic experience in the war, he became a writer of many notable Civil War short stories. Now we'll look into the Southern civilian. So war is greatly romanticized in the time leading up to and even during the Civil War, and the main character, and this is true for many people living then, extract their version of martial knowledge from history, communal hearsay, and different anecdotes, but basically anything other than actual military experience. We can look at the first major battle of the war to see how deep this fantasy ran in civilians' minds. At the Battle of Bull Run, civilians expected this to be a form of entertainment for their afternoon and actually went as spectators. There were all different walks of life present at the battle, from government officials to hotel waiters. However, no one in the crowd was expecting to see this, a true war battle. It was very common for people to believe that if you really wanted to be a man, then you would have to fight for your country. And in the story, Peyton has no business participating in the war, but he subscribes to this military propaganda as his model for masculinity, which allows him to be easily persuaded to participate in the war. And along with this martial masculinity, men wanted to be a part of this community atmosphere of contributing to their nation. And now we'll look into the Union Army. So men went to war for a variety of reasons: patriotism, honor, ideas about manhood and war, to save their nation, to fight for freedom, and to punish a South perceived as traitorous, which we do see in the story. As time goes on in the war, many of these young men lose their idealism due to the atrocities they're a part of while fighting. And soldiers feared being ashamed for weakness, so they obeyed orders even if they knew it would lead to certain death. And lastly, we're going to look at the punishment that the Union Army gives. So hanging was a fairly common punishment that was given to whom the military believed committed the worst crimes, because hanging was seen as the most demeaning death. And every punishment intended to belittle the person's masculinity and impress upon him the power and authority of the military. As mentioned before, Ambrose Bierce served in the Union Army. Bierce most likely enlisted with these idealistic illusions of war. He participated in some of the bloodiest battles of the war. He was captured as a prisoner of war, and he even survived a massive head wound after being shot. So he lived through this traumatic experience and was able to write about the war. But Bierce did this in a very non-traditional approach. He could have written his first-hand accounts, however, he decided to write fictional short stories that reject the romanticization of war. An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge can help us to understand aspects of the Civil War that are not usually taught in school, and do so in an unconventional way through a fictional short story. Bierce's stories teach us more about the psyche of the people during the era. So Peyton most likely gets out of serving because of an exemption for owning over a certain amount of slaves on his property, and it's because he is not required to fight that he wants to embrace this warlike plan to achieve a heroic distinction and live up to his highly respected family name. And under observation, Peyton is more inclined to obey these orders given by this disguised soldier and assume risky behaviors because his actions will grant him acceptance into the martial community and bring honor to his name and restore a sense of manhood that he doesn't get because he doesn't fight in the war. And that's true of the soldiers fighting in the Civil War. And finally, Bierce displays the grim reality of war by showing consequences for people's actions. This is something that helps reject that romanticization of war because you see that Peyton's rash decision harms his family, his wife, and his children, and he even ends up dying in a dehumanizing manner. To conclude, Ambrose Bierce survived as a Union soldier to write historical, accurate, fictional. To conclude, Ambrose Bierce survived as a Union soldier to write historically accurate fictional stories that display notions of war versus the reality of war. His literary work can help to better understand notions of war, specifically the Civil War. An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge displays how the overly romanticized ideals of war are terribly incorrect and provide a look into the minds that were involved in the Civil War. It is an accurate portrayal of the real-life events and can help to better understand the Civil War today. And some questions that can help for further research are: what class setting would this story be most beneficial for learning? What other stories could benefit students to read alongside this one to learn different aspects of the Civil War? And how do the perceptions of war displayed in this story compare to perceptions of war today?